The storm had been raging for 3 days when I found them. I was checking the fence line on the north pasture of my struggling homestead when I saw the blood trail in the mud, dark crimson drops leading from the creek toward a stand of cottonwoods that marked the boundary of my land. Any sensible man would have turned back, fetched his rifle, and approached with caution. But something about the pattern of the blood, the way it seemed to speak of desperation rather than aggression, made me follow it with nothing but the hope that I might help rather than harm. My name is Samuel Garrett, and I'd been trying to make a living on this patch of Montana territory for 2 years with little to show for it, but calloused hands and a stubborn refusal to admit defeat. The land was good. Rich soil, plenty of water, grass that grew thick as a carpet, but I lacked the capital to make it profitable. Most days I felt like I was one bad season away from losing everything I'd worked for. But that morning, as I followed the blood trail deeper into the cottonwoods, I discovered something that would change my life forever. They were huddled together beneath a fallen log, 2 young Lakota women who couldn't have been more than 20 years old. Sisters, by the look of them, with the same high cheekbones and dark eyes that spoke of noble bloodlines. But those eyes were now clouded with pain and fever, and the makeshift bandages wrapped around their wounds were soaked through with blood. The older of the 2, I would later learn her name was Winona, meaning firstborn daughter, tried to sit up when she saw me approaching. Her hand moved weakly toward a knife at her belt, but she lacked the strength to draw it. Her sister, Ayanna, was unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored. "Please," Winona whispered in broken English, her voice barely audible above the rain. "My sister, she needs help." I could see bullet wounds in both women. Winona had been shot in the shoulder while Ayanna had taken a round to her side that was still bleeding freely. They'd been running for some time, probably days, and infection was already setting in. Any reasonable man would have walked away. The territory was in the midst of escalating tensions between settlers and the various tribes, and harboring wounded Indians, especially Lakota, was tantamount to signing your own death warrant. The cavalry would shoot you as a traitor. The settlers would burn you out as an Indian lover, and the tribes themselves might kill you for witnessing their vulnerability. But as I looked into Winona's pain-filled eyes, I saw something that made all those considerations irrelevant. I saw 2 human beings who were dying, and I was the only person in 100 miles who could help them. "Can you walk?" I asked, kneeling beside them. Winona nodded weakly. Little bit. "Then we need to get you both to my cabin. This storm's getting worse, and you'll die of exposure if we don't get you warm and dry." It took the better part of an hour to get them back to my homestead. Winona managed to walk with my support, but I had to carry Ayanna, her limp form feeling frighteningly light in my arms. By the time we reached the cabin, all 3 of us were soaked to the bone and shivering with cold. I settled them on my bed, the only real furniture I owned, and set about building up the fire. Then came the delicate work of treating their wounds. I'd learned field medicine during my time in the Union Army, but that had been years ago, and I'd never worked on patients who might die if I made a mistake. Winona's shoulder wound was clean. The bullet had passed through without hitting bone. But Ayanna's injury was more serious. The bullet was still lodged near her ribs, and I could see signs of infection spreading from the wound site. "I have to get the bullet out," I told Winona as I heated my knife blade in the fire. "It's going to hurt." "Do what you must," she replied, gripping her sister's hand. "She is all I have left. The surgery was a nightmare of blood and pain." Ayanna regained consciousness halfway through and nearly bit through the leather strap I'd given her to clench between her teeth. But somehow, miraculously, I managed to extract the bullet and clean the wound without causing further damage. For the next 3 days, I nursed them back to health. I fed them broth made from the last of my winter stores, changed their bandages, with strips torn from my own shirts, and sat vigil through the nights when their fevers spiked, and they called out in Lakota for family members who couldn't hear them. Slowly, gradually, they began to recover. Winona was the first to regain her strength, and as she did, she began to tell me their story. "We are daughters of Chief Red Cloud," she said one evening as we sat by the fire. "Our father leads the largest band of Lakota in this territory. We were traveling to a peace council when we were attacked by white men. Not soldiers, but civilians who wanted to claim the bounty on Indian scalps. My blood ran cold. I'd heard rumors of such bounty hunters, men who killed Indians for the money, that certain territorial officials would pay for proof of dead natives. It was an ugly business that most decent folks pretended didn't exist. They killed our escort, Winona continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. 6 brave warriors, dead because they tried to protect us. We escaped, but barely. Why were you going to a peace council? Because our father believes that war will destroy our people. He seeks a path that will allow the Lakota to survive in this changing world. She looked at me with those penetrating dark eyes. You have shown us kindness, Samuel Garrett. You have risked your life to save ours. But you must understand, when our father discovers what has happened, when he learns that his daughters were nearly killed by white men, there may be no stopping the war that follows. As if summoned by her words, we heard the sound of approaching horses. Many horses moving with the disciplined precision of a war party. I moved to the window and peered through the shutters, my heart sinking as I saw what awaited us in the pre-dawn darkness. At least 50 Lakota warriors had surrounded my cabin, their painted faces grim in the firelight of their torches. At their head rode a man whose very presence seemed to command the night itself. Chief Red Cloud, war leader of the Oglala Lakota, the man who had fought the U.S. Army to a standstill and forced them to abandon the Bozeman Trail. They've found us, I said quietly. Winona struggled to her feet, her face pale but determined. My father has come. Now we will learn whether your kindness has earned you a place among the living or the dead. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I realized that my simple act of mercy was about to be judged by one of the most powerful war chiefs in the American West, and depending on that judgment, I would either see another sunset or become just another casualty in the endless conflict between two worlds that seemed destined never to understand each other. The sound of Chief Red Cloud's voice carried across the morning air like thunder, speaking in Lakota to his daughters. Whatever he was saying, I could tell from Winona's expression that my fate hung in the balance. Dawn was breaking, and with it would come the judgment that would determine not just my future, but possibly the future of every settler in the territory. Chief Red Cloud dismounted from his war horse with the fluid grace of a man born to command, his eagle feather headdress catching the first rays of dawn sunlight. Even at a distance, I could see the legendary scars that marked his weathered face, testament to countless battles fought against both rival tribes and the encroaching white settlements. Winona! Ayana! He called out in Lakota, his voice carrying the authority of absolute leadership and the desperate concern of a father who had thought his daughters dead. I opened the cabin door slowly, keeping my hands visible. Chief Red Cloud, I said in what I hoped was a respectful tone. Your daughters are safe. They're wounded, but they're alive. The war chief's dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through to my soul. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, but his presence filled the clearing like a force of nature. Behind him, his warriors sat their horses in perfect silence, their painted faces unreadable in the growing light. Winona appeared in the doorway beside me, leaning heavily against the frame, but standing proud. When she spoke in rapid Lakota, I caught only fragments, words that sounded like explanations, defenses, pleas. Her father's expression remained stone cold as he listened, but I saw his hands clench when she described the attack that had nearly killed them. You, Red Cloud said suddenly, switching to heavily accented English and pointing directly at me. You are the one who saved my daughters? I did what any decent man would do, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Any decent man? Red Cloud's laugh was sharp as a blade. Do you know how many decent white men passed them by as they fled? How many saw 2 wounded Indian women and chose to look the other way? I had no answer for that, because we both knew the truth. In a territory where Indians were often seen as less than human, most settlers would have considered helping wounded Lakota to be an act of treason against their own kind. Red Cloud stepped closer, close enough that I could see the intelligence burning in his dark eyes. My daughter tells me you removed a bullet from Ayana's body. You nursed them for 3 days. You fed them from your own stores, though you clearly have little to spare. They were hurt. They needed help. And you gave it knowing that harboring Lakota could cost you your life. Red Cloud studied me for a long moment. Why? The question hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. I could feel the weight of 50 warriors' gazes, could sense that my answer would determine not just my fate, but possibly the fate of every settler within 100 miles. Because they're human beings, I said simply. Because suffering is suffering regardless of the color of the skin that contains it. Because I took an oath once as a soldier to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Red Cloud's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. You were a soldier? Union Army. I fought at Gettysburg Antietam Bull Run. I've seen enough death to last several lifetimes. And yet you chose to preserve life rather than take it. I chose to do what I thought was right. The chief was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between me and his daughters. When Ayana appeared in the doorway, pale and weak but alive, his composure finally cracked. I saw the relief flood his features, followed immediately by a rage so pure it made the air itself seem to vibrate. The men who did this, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than any shout. They will pay. In blood. Chief, I said carefully. Your daughters mentioned they were going to a peace council. If you start a war over this, start a war? Red Cloud's eyes blazed. White man, the war never ended. It has simply been waiting for the right moment to resume. He turned to address his warriors in Lakota, and I didn't need to understand the language to know he was giving orders for revenge. The bounty hunters who had attacked his daughters had just signed the death warrant for every white settlement in the territory. But then Winona spoke up, her voice weak but determined. Whatever she said made her father pause, his head turning back toward me, with an expression I couldn't read. My daughter says, you have earned a debt that cannot be repaid. With simple gratitude, Red Cloud said slowly. She says you have shown honor that demands honor in return. I don't want anything in return, I just want— What you want is irrelevant, the chief interrupted. What matters is what honor demands. You have saved the lives of Red Cloud's daughters. By the laws of my people, this creates a bond that cannot be broken. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the sage smoke that clung to his buckskin shirt. Samuel Garrett, you will come with us. You will stand before the full council of the Lakota Nation. There your fate will be decided, not by me alone, but by the wisdom of our elders and the judgment of our people. My mouth went dry. And if I refuse? Red Cloud's smile was sharp as a tomahawk blade. Then you die here and now, and your kindness dies with you. But if you come willingly, if you face our judgment with courage— He paused, glancing at his daughters. Then perhaps something good can come from this darkness. As the sun climbed higher in the Montana sky, I realized I had no choice but to trust in the honor of a people I barely understood, hoping that the mercy I had shown would be returned in kind. The Lakota encampment stretched across the valley like a living tapestry, hundreds of teepees arranged in perfect circles that spoke of ancient traditions and unbreakable social bonds. Smoke from countless fires rose into the clear Montana sky, carrying with it the scents of roasting buffalo meat and burning sage. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, a reminder that I was now completely at the mercy of a people whose ways I barely understood. They had given me a horse for the 3-day journey, and Winona had ridden beside me despite her injuries, serving as both guide and protector. Her presence had kept the more hostile warriors from expressing their displeasure at having a white man in their midst, but I could feel their eyes on me constantly, measuring, judging, waiting. You are afraid, Winona observed as we approached the great council lodge at the center of the encampment. Terrified, I admitted. Your people have every reason to hate mine. Fear is not always weakness, she said thoughtfully. Sometimes it is wisdom, but you should know my sister and I have spoken for you. We have told the council of your kindness, your courage, your willingness to risk everything for strangers. Will it matter? That depends on you. The council will test, not just your words, but your heart. They will seek to understand what kind of man you truly are. The council lodge was massive, easily large enough to hold 100 people. As we entered, I was struck by the solemnity of the gathering. Dozens of tribal elders, war chiefs, and medicine men sat in a great circle, their weathered faces grave in the firelight. At the center sat an ancient woman whose presence seemed to command the very air itself. "That is Grandmother Singing Bird," Winona whispered. "She is our most respected elder, keeper of our oldest wisdom. Her word carries more weight than even my father's." Red Cloud stood and addressed the assembly in Lakota, his voice carrying the weight of formal ceremony. I caught fragments: my name, references to his daughters, words that sounded like accusations and defenses intermingled. When he finished, the ancient woman gestured for me to step forward. "Samuel Garrett," she said in surprisingly clear English, her voice like wind through autumn leaves. "You stand before the council of the Lakota Nation. We have heard that you saved the lives of our chief's daughters. Is this true?" "Yes, Grandmother. And you did this knowing it could cost you your life?" "I did it because it was the right thing to do." Singing Bird studied me with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. "The right thing. Tell me, white man, what makes something right or wrong in your understanding?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected accusations, demands for explanation, perhaps even immediate judgment. Instead, I was being asked to defend my moral philosophy before some of the wisest people on the continent. "I believe," I said slowly, "that all people deserve compassion regardless of their race or tribe. I believe that when someone is suffering, those who can help have a duty to do so. I believe that the color of a person's skin matters less than the content of their character." A murmur ran through the assembly. Some voices sounded approving, others skeptical. "Pretty words," said a scarred war chief I didn't recognize. "But words are wind. What proof do we have that this white man speaks truth?" Before I could answer, Ayanna struggled to her feet from where she'd been sitting with the other women. Her face was still pale from her injuries, but her voice was strong as she addressed the council. "I offer proof," she said in Lakota, then switched to English so I could understand. "This man could have taken advantage of our weakness. We were helpless, defenseless, completely at his mercy. Instead, he treated us with respect and kindness. He gave us his own bed while he slept on the floor. He fed us his own food while he went hungry. He tended our wounds with the gentleness of a brother." She paused, her dark eyes finding mine across the circle. "But more than that, he saw us as human beings worthy of saving. In a world where many of his people see us as animals to be hunted, he chose to see us as sisters to be protected." Grandmother Singing Bird nodded slowly. "The daughters of Red Cloud have spoken. Their words carry weight. But the council must decide. What shall be done with this white man who has shown honor among a people not his own?" The debate that followed was conducted entirely in Lakota, but I could read the emotions on the faces around the circle. Some argued passionately for my release. Others seemed to advocate for harsher measures. Through it all, Red Cloud remained silent, his expression unreadable. Finally, Grandmother Singing Bird raised her hand for silence. "The council has reached a decision," she announced. "Samuel Garrett, you have shown that not all white men are enemies of the Lakota people. You have proven that honor can exist between our peoples. Therefore, we offer you a choice." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What choice?" "You may return to your homestead with our protection and our gratitude. No Lakota warrior will ever raise a hand against you, and you will always be welcome in our camps." "And the other option?" The old woman's eyes twinkled with something that might have been mischief. "You may stay among us and learn our ways. You may become a bridge between our peoples, a voice for understanding in a world filled with hatred." I looked around the circle, seeing faces that had transformed from suspicion to something approaching acceptance. But it was Winona's expression that made my decision for me. Hope mixed with something deeper. something that made my heart race. With possibilities I'd never dared imagine. "I choose to stay," I said, my voice carrying across the silent lodge. "I choose to learn." Grandmother Singing Bird smiled, and for the first time since entering the lodge, I felt like I might actually survive this judgment. Then, let the teaching begin. 1 year later, I stood at the edge of the same valley where the Lakota Council had judged my soul. But everything had changed. The encampment buzzed with activity as both Lakota families and white settlers worked together, trading goods and sharing knowledge that had once been forbidden. I had become what Grandmother Singing Bird had envisioned, a bridge between worlds. My homestead now served as a neutral meeting ground where disputes were settled with words instead of bullets, where children of both peoples played together without fear. But the greatest change was in my heart. Winona approached, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where our child grew. We had married in a ceremony that honored both traditions, witnessed by her father and blessed by both Grandmother Singing Bird and the circuit preacher who had ridden out from the nearest settlement. "The council is ready," she said, her eyes bright with anticipation. Today marked the signing of a formal peace treaty, not between governments, but between communities. Red Cloud and the territorial governor would put their names to an agreement that established permanent boundaries, trade relationships, and most importantly, mutual respect. "Are you nervous?" Winona asked as we walked toward the great lodge. "Terrified," I admitted with a smile. "But it's a good kind of fear, the kind that comes before something wonderful." Inside the lodge, I took my place as translator and mediator, the role I had grown into over the past year. As Red Cloud and Governor Matthews shook hands over the signed treaty, I felt a profound sense of completion. What had begun with a simple act of mercy, helping 2 wounded women, had grown into something neither side had thought possible. Genuine, peace built on understanding rather than fear. That evening, as Winona and I sat by our fire watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, she placed my hand on her belly. "What do you think our child will be?" she asked. "A bridge," I said without hesitation. "Like us, someone who belongs to both worlds and helps them understand each other." She smiled, leaning against my shoulder. "I love you, Samuel Garrett. And I love you, Winona Red Cloud Garrett." As the stars emerged in the vast Montana sky, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. A poor farmer's act of compassion had not only saved 2 lives, it had helped birth a new kind of future, one where different peoples could coexist in harmony. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the largest changes in the world.